of curiosity and recognizing that some people will feel judged because they are judging themselves. Some people will feel judged because that
Yeah.
is their experience, right? And so we are response able. Um, and we hope that that's how people will receive what emerges from our conversations and that people are on their own journey. Um, and I also feel like I do have opinions.
Yeah.
And so, my opinions hopefully uh, land in a way that people can make their own decisions about how they work with that in their lives.
Yeah. And when I'm speaking from the texts themselves, as far as because in yogic tradition, Ayurvedic tradition, there's an understanding of what we call, and then we'll jump in it because I have a contractor here, and then I told him like 10:30, 10:45, that there's 4 to 5 primary ways of knowledge to actually know something. And we'll mention the other ones, but the one that's mostly important is Aptopadesha, which is like Aptopadesha is the teacher, but the teacher, when we say Apta in Ayurveda, we're not saying like, oh yeah, that professor of, whatever mastery they're in the field of. As my mentor says, there are very few Aptas that live on this planet. And these are the beings that possess the highest uh, bridge to that universal knowledge that is a pure conduit for that information that is indisputable. That if a dispute arises, it's because the person within their context of their own psyche has the conflict, but it's not to invalidate that particular knowledge. It's completely like at the essence of like sat, which is like truth. And so
Mm-hmm.
Charaka Samhita, there's 3 primary texts in Ayurveda: Charaka Samhita, Shushruta Samhita, and Ashtanga Sangraha slash Ashtanga Hridayam. The first two, like these are the 3 aptas. They are the knowers of Ayurveda. You just learn what they say, you interpret it properly, and you apply it properly, you get the outcome properly that represents Ayurveda. But the 2 first texts of the 2 first physicians, they were like at an exceeded level of consciousness that they are the true apta. So they weren't just a teacher, they were like the knowledge. So these particular
Mm.
texts. So when I'm conveying like shlokas from Charaka, I will interpret based on what I've read and what I can see that's interpreted. But I don't want to deviate with like my personal opinion of Charaka Samhita, because then it's my personal opinion. It's not Charaka anymore. And so when we do these things, I want to like really drop these seeds, because these are the things that these kind of teachings sit in the back of the consciousness to go and slowly kind of burrow and kind of create that
Mm.
unraveling process. And I don't know when that happens. My job is just to share and be in alignment with these teachings as much as possible, so that in integrity, the teachings continue to live on with their potency as they have for 10,000 years.
I think this is a
So
really important point. And can you also share for folks again what a shloka is?
yeah. Oh, and we're recording now, right? So this is great.
Yes, we
Yeah.
are. Yes,
So
we are.
so shloka in Ayurveda, or in general, like Sanskrit terms, is a particular line from a particular text. So
Mhm.
rather than saying like, oh yeah, what's that line in that particular text, we automatically know, because of the way Sanskrit language is designed, is we say shloka.
Mhm.
And so it's like, oh, this shloka from this particular text, the Yoga Vasishta's shloka, or the Charaka Samhita shloka, or Patanjali's shloka from, the Yoga Sutras, or something like a particular line that's conveying a particular information out of that content, that text. Um,
Mhm.
yeah. And so, anyways, with the context of, Ayurveda and talking about prana, there's a lot to be said about prana, and this can be like, you can do like weeks and weeks of like discussion on prana. For the simplicity of prana, we, commonly know in the West, prana is, life force or vital energy. And, I remember learning in meditation when I first started meditation over 2 decades ago, the teacher saying, if you have a dead body lying there and you try to resuscitate it with oxygen, it will not come back to life. If you're able to harness the power of prana, and Chinese medicine would call it qi, similar. If you're able to harness that prana and infuse it into that dead body, you will bring life back, because prana is the life force. It is the vital energy. It is what creates that constituted subtle material matter of existence that animates, creates the animation behind things. So
Mhm.
body is animated because of prana, and then the physiological processes of oxygenation and carbon dioxide, CO2, all these things, those are biochemical processes as a response to physiological processes, as a response to like some underlying current of deeply inherent intelligence, which is prana. And in Ayurveda, just giving a little bit of the anatomy, so when we lead into like the food context, it kind of makes a little more sense. Um, Understanding prana does this in the body, that it realizes an intelligence and reaffirms an intelligence on a deep cellular level. And so when it's this ambiguity, obscurity, dullness of the senses or fragmentation of the senses, and prana will be stressed. Prana is very subtle. And so it's like more subtle than the wind, and the wind already is unstable. And prana, when it's cultivated, when you're cultivating chi, when you're cultivating prana, doing pranayam in yoga,
Mhm.
which is one of the 8 branches of what's called Ashtanga yoga, which is true yoga in the 8 branches, and pranayama is a step. You're cultivating prana in the body, and as you're
Can I
cultivating
pause
prana
you
in the
for a
body,
second, Dr. A? Because I think
yep,
for folks who are listening, there may be, or people who are joining, right? I've learned pranayama as breath work practice, right? I've taken pranayama classes, and but you're giving a more holistic understanding to where pranayama lives within the body work, the body of yoga, right? The larger um practice and wisdom tradition of yoga.
yeah, and so we're actually getting more of the foundation to like the background behind these like
Hmm.
loose terms. I'm
Yes,
going to prana yoga and I wear prana t-shirts, and these are all
correct.
great buzz things, but and similarly, like we talked before this talk about karma, people just throwing the word around like, oh, that's karma, it's like this is prana. But it is important to really understand, like, what is this? Like, what is
Hmm.
we talking about? Where does it come from? And so prana comes from this universal understanding of this subtle energy that creates this animated process. It's a vital energy, it's a life force, it's a continuation of this momentum of energy, and it gets into a physical being, and then it creates who we are. And based on, there's pranic healers where they work on like the subtle energies of the body using pranas, using marma points, using like acupuncture, which it's working with chi, but marma works with prana, so it's similar, just different wording, basically. And you know, and in Ayurveda, when we're looking at prana, we're looking at the person's like enthusiasm and energetics and clarity of mind and sort of like liveliness in their being. And so when we're doing pranayama, for example, and as part of a yoga class, whether you're doing alternate nostril breathing, nadi shodhana, or a couple of bhakti, with just like fast breath, and you're doing like retention of breath and expansion of breath, like all these things are manipulating the breath energies that lead you sort of like as a precursor to getting ready for meditation, because you're setting up the life force and the electrical currents in the body, and the subtle electrical currents in the body in a way that meditation becomes more optimal. And then when you can get into more meditation, then those get more efficient. So they're
Hmm.
very mutually connecting. And so knowing, okay, this is what we're doing when we're doing yoga and we're doing pranayama properly. And when we're doing pranayama improperly, we can cause more disease, which it's very interesting in the Materia Medica of Ayurveda in recent years, maybe like starting 15, 18 years ago. They added a new chapter of medical management of people that mismanage and inappropriately do yoga and pranayama techniques that have caused diseases. Yoga has existed for thousands of years. And we
Hmm.
work on not causing disease with yoga and pranayama and eating properly and all these things per Ayurveda. And now we have like this new, like, well, if you're doing Kundalini yoga when you shouldn't be doing Kundalini yoga because you have rosacea, you have eczema, you have, blistering skin rashes and all these things, and your type A personality, then of course you're going to increase that process because you're increasing so much prana, the body's burning up its tissue. And then you're wondering like, oh, I feel great from this high. Of course you will. If you're a heroin addict, you're not going to say like you feel horrible, but then when you crash, you crash. And then when I've had many patients over the years come in with chronic disturbances because they've done Kundalini yoga or they've done these kind of practices. They're like, this is really good. It's supposed to be good for opening my chakras. I'm like, you've created negative karma doing that, and you also created negative damage in your physical body because it was not appropriate for you.
Mm.
And for example, like I have a patient, he's 73, and he got involved with the yoga movement when it first started. So it's like early like 60s. And he was in an ashram environment and he was doing really intense yoga kriyas, which is like these particular like activating exercises that engage prana at a very high level. And he's already vata predominant, he has ADHD to begin with. They didn't have that diagnosis back then. And he's doing these practices and he burnt out his nervous system. Yeah, he can never gain weight at this point in time because the many years that he's done that, the amount of damage that he's done, it's now 73, he can't recuperate as much. But just from doing inappropriate kriyas, which involves prana, pranic manipulations, and then in the physical body, and he was having these tremors, which can be common when you're doing certain practices. But if your body can't sustain it, you will burn out, right? It's like
Mhm.
having a modern day house with old copper wiring. You try to use the current voltage, it will burn the wires much faster, you know? So everything has to be up to code, right? And so when we're doing these practices properly, we're strengthening this through, and, through food. We want food to have prana. It has to have life force. And, you know, if we don't have life force coming into the food, then how can a person not feel anxious and depressed? Because where's the life force
Mm.
coming from? Because life force gives you energy, vitality, enthusiasm, passion, and an energetic quality of like connecting with life. That when you see your tree, you kind of feel this symbiotic relationship of like, this is so lovely when I see a flower, when I see the trees, when I see the clouds. Like you're in connection with the subtle prana on a pranic level within your own physiological processes. You don't know that unless you have this deeper awareness. And then you're like, how amazing is this? So when you see food and it's a really beautiful arrangement of food, and you're like, your eyes are like, this is amazing. You're starting to salivate. This is like an activation. You haven't tasted it yet. Why are you salivating it? Because the mind is already like, oh, I'm feeling this energetics of this food, this vital green and these beautiful purple, blue colors from the, blueberries when you're going to have blueberries. Like, this is all prana. And when you're thinking of like, oh, here's farming and you're seeing things grow, things are being infused with prana. And so when we bring this into food, it's like if you're having packaged food that's, you know, frozen and or canned or any of these things, some foods can hold prana for a certain period of time, but once it's already off the vine or already plucked from the grain, it starts to lose some of its prana. So you try to get prana into the body as much as possible. So you have a higher chance when you have more wholesome foods, more or organic foods that are like not treated with crap that kind of like helps it oxidizing and sort of damages the immune cells of the system, the produce, and you're fighting all these odds, but essentially when you get the more wholesome food, the more fresh food, the more prana you still have in that food. But prana cannot be frozen. Prana cannot be suspended in time and space. It's an ongoing energetics that keeps moving. And when we cook, in microwave, sure, there was an article recently justifying like, do you get actual nutritional quality from food that you eat from a microwave? And it's going to say yes, and it did say yes because of caloric intake, the proteins that are measured, the fat content, the carbohydrates. Of course, you're looking at it from that level. Ayurveda doesn't care about food from that level. It's not important to think about that. And what cannot be quantified or qualified through that examination is prana. The food should be
Mhm.
vital. So microwave will not infuse prana. It will zap prana because it's being zapped. This is sort of molecular structure of like how microwaves work. These are microwaves that are bouncing around. And in that process, that food is being inundated, just like the millimeter wave machines that we walk through in airports. your prana is being zapped when you walk through it. And they are operating through the technology at a low frequency. At a higher frequency, which is where those things developed from, was from crowd control when governments would try to control people with millimeter wave machines, and it would impose like a pain and a burning sensation on their skin and their body because of these millimeter waves. And so they create lower grades so that when you're walking through, you just be like, oh, metal detector. But you're getting zapped with a millimeter wave machine. And so I usually opt out most times and just do like, I opt out, I want to get patted down so that I don't walk through.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So we think about all this in the terms of like, what is prana and like, how are we taking prana? You know, what's the quality of the environment we live in? You know, is it an environment that supports prana? You know, do you have a house that has pleasant colors and natural elements like actual woods, minimal
Mm-hmm.
fake woods, and you have the metals and you have like the earthiness of like plants and like you might have a stone here and there and pictures of lovely things. Like these are things that will support, satisfy, nourish, and feed the senses
Mm-hmm.
when you're not going to the woods. Right?
Can I pause you for a second? Because
Yes.
there's so this is um there's a there's something that you know when you were sharing about um prana and the way that we can um misuse healing practices, like yoga, misuse our yeah, those healing practices. And we, you know, I think you spoke a little bit about Kundalini, and there was something there for me about um the ways in which we are, and I say we, the ways in which humans, but I'm going to speak about me, and maybe there's other this applies um to others, that when you are in a healing process, or before you consciously enter into healing or into wellness practice, and you want to feel good, right? So there's the want to feel good, get high, like you when you talked about like what happens um when you are high on an externally created substance, or when you are high, right? When you have increased the hormones, the neurotransmitters that are giving you a sense of elation, of euphoria, that high that you can experience with Kundalini yoga, the um, the elevation, right, of your embodied experience. When you're seeking that, um, and you're trying to do that to literally feel more life force energy, and yet um, there are, as I'm hearing you say, like imbalances that we might be experiencing in our bodies already that are working in opposition. So like when I hear you talk about like eczema or rosacea, my, you know, limited understanding of Ayurveda is like, oh, I'm hearing, or when you talk about ADHD, I'm hearing vata imbalance. I'm hearing, but maybe there's obviously more there, but I'm hearing more about like an imbalance of speed. So there's something to here that I feel like um feels resonant to my own personal experience about trying to get to feel good and trying to do the things to get to feel good, that's taking me out of relationship with life force energy.
Mhm.
And so I just like, what are you hearing? What's there?
Yeah. There's a word in Ayurvedic in Sanskrit that's called ati chestatayihi, which is like busyness of the mind or multitasking or just overall like doing too much. And when you're thinking
Oh,
about
I'm
the
queen do too
physics,
much, you know this.
I mean, we live in a
I'm like,
society where
yeah.
this we live in a society where this is a thing. It's an accumulating process of the direction that the society is going in with how fast things are going by virtue of just life, momentum, time, space, technology, all these things. And, you know, that speed, you know, we're not designed fundamentally. to have that exposure to that high velocity of speed, right? And no matter how much we think we are, just like people are I'm going to be blunt, foolish to think, oh, I have this mentality that I'm a night owl. No, you just have an imbalance that dictates the possibility that you think you're a night owl. Physiologically, you know, at the most basic level, we're not supposed to be. We're not. It's not a healthy state. But you can justify it and say, whatever. It's fine. People like to justify habits. We all justify habits. It doesn't mean it's correct. It just means it's justified
That's
in
right.
supporting our own mental state wherever we're at. So the speed, of course, is going to be rooted in like aspects of prana being activated because prana's everywhere. But vata, now we get more into the dosha qualities or the manifested groupings of the elements, which includes air and space, which is like this movement. Air is movement. Ether or space, Akash, is basically like a non-movement space. It's just an empty space. The first thing to happen with movement is air. And so when there's a lot of air and it picks up to like a hurricane speed, to a monsoon speed, to a tornado speed, to a really subtle brisk wind, to like a really calm, simple like whisper of a wind. Like these are all versions of Vata. And when everything has all the five elements, when one of the elements starts to go out of sync or out of context or in excess, then of course the other ones will be affected. Because in all diseases, you know, there's a predominance of tendencies with the doshas that some people will be more prone towards certain things based on a trajectory. This is how we predict diseases in Ayurveda and how we prevent that based on this amazing knowledge that the rishis, that the original physicians of Ayurveda created, this understanding and sort of circumvented. Knowing all that and saying like, these are the doshas, and the doshas are going to go out of balance in certain people, certain ways in certain times because of just natural gravity of things. But all the doshas will be affected. Because eventually if you have like three friends hanging out, one gets a little pissed off, the other two will be like, meh, we can ignore it to a certain point until that one becomes very rambunctious, and then the other two friends start to get also aggravated. Now all three are aggravated. All the doshas are usually involved pretty much in everything. It's a matter of time, waiting in time, and it's a matter of just like the weight of how much the momentum is going, or the speed of how much momentum is going of the doshas. They're looking at biological constituents, which are doshic manifestations. And so, of course, this busy lifestyle on the go and multitasking and, all these things is pathology. I was I was thinking about something the other day and I was like, I want to just double check the current standards of like where we're at with attention span. And over the past, 15, 20 years, attention span has reduced from 2.5 minutes to 45 seconds.
Oh, is it 45 now? I thought it was 17. Okay.
Uh, well, I've
No,
never
you,
seen 17, but there's probably multiple studies that different, I'm sure. This was the first one that popped up, and I was like, even whether it went from 2.5 minutes to 45 or 17,
it's
that's a
ridiculous.
that's a
It's,
degradation. That's a
yeah,
degradation of the nervous system because
yes.
everyone is kind of doing this all the time and quick fixes, and we're getting dopamine hits, and we're getting cortisol shots, and we're like, I got to do this, and I got to do this, and I can't remember this, and I can't remember this. No, I remember a professor at the clinic I did my clinicals in one of the first times in India. He said, "Oh, one of the easiest ways to remedy without medicine, a child that has ADD, is force them to memorize." And I was
Hmm.
like, that's a little slippery slope, but I could see where you're going with that. And he was like, we don't really try to memorize. We try to like just quickly pull things in short-term memory and keep going. He's like, but long-term memory will not have that. And he's like, ADD, I mean, it's still less in India compared to like the Western model of life, which is like,
Hmm.
what are we doing differently? That and their model of education is very different. The average six-year-old in India knows 5 languages. Often, in English, Hindi, you might know Sanskrit, you might know your native language, and there might be another one.
That's right.
5 languages by the age of
Hmm.
6. Meanwhile, the average 6-year-old in the US barely knows English. What
Yeah.
is wrong with the mind?
This is, I
What is
mean, I think there's two things that are coming. It's like what I was actually recently talking with a friend who is Congolese, and she was saying like for her and for her children, she speaks 7 languages. When you live in countries on the continent of Africa, you may speak more like upwards of 10 languages just living in your own country or living in your own community, because there are so many languages spoken, so many dialects of the languages spoken,
Yeah,
right? Languages that are spoken, right, using not non-word sounds, right? So you're also mixing in using different parts of your body and brain. You're activating um different movements in your mouth. And I
yep,
think this
yep,
definitely has like a polyvagal impact. There's something happening that's
yep.
regulating the nervous system. And so when you're talking about the speed, as someone who identifies as neurospicy, neuroexpansive, who has a late uh, diagnosis of ADHD, post 40, um, in a Black woman's body, right, where it was not present that something was happening with my nervous system, right,
Mhm.
that my attention does not have a deficit, but in fact can move very quickly, have hyper focus, and be in multiple places
Mhm.
at one time. And this experience of ADHD also overlaps with experiences with the way that the brain experiences trauma, the way that the brain reacts to, or the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system is responding to traumatic experiences.
Yeah,
So I want to acknowledge, right, that the context, the social and systemic and structural context that we live in a fast moving, uh, productivity centered, capitalist structure, that moves quickly to capitalize every movement,
oh yeah,
creates, right? It does create distraction, it does create pulls, it does create all of this movement, and that is counterintuitive to what uh, settles, regulates the nervous system, and allows us to connect with life force. So there's like so much, right? To your point,
yeah,
multitasking is not a good idea for me. It doesn't serve. And also, um, I have to live in opposition to the standards, and I do, right? The way that I live my life is a form of rebellion, because I relate to time differently now at 43 than I
hmm,
did, at 39, when I was in 3 different cities in a week and on the
hmm,
phone and on the, right, like keeping up. So
yeah,
I want to place it in context, but also I'm curious, like when we think about how prana dies in the microwave,
hmm,
how do we change our relationship with time? And this is a consistent practice that I am working with in my own work and my own practice, and with clients, to change our relationship with time. How do we slow down time so
yeah.
that we can be present?
But one guaranteed way is um roga, which is disease.
Ooh,
And
speak
this
on
is
it.
where, and I say it facetiously because this is where society is going, right? So we have increased issues in health arising with minimal, uprooting of these diseases. There's just becoming, oh, here's one new disease. We'll just add one more thing, and it's more another line of treatment for another line of disease instead of getting to like, why are these diseases arising? You know, and this getting to disease will definitely put perspective on a person depending on the nature of the disease and how it affects and afflicts their life, that they will slow down, right? But we try not to get to that point. So we try to have an increased level of awareness in knowing our relationship to life and go, I can't sustain this high-paced, stressful experience, Ayasa means stress in Ayurveda. And then we're doing Ati Chasatai, which is multitasking. We're increasing stress. when we have what's called apiti charitra, which is, um, you know, past trauma, in Ayurveda, or assaults, one of the direct translations, this automatically exalts Vata. Of course, because Vata is the air and space. It's Akash and Vayu. And so the wind gets really easily afflicted. And the mind is like the wind. And so when we can incorporate, like there are some schools, not many, that incorporate like yoga and breathing and meditation to cultivate the mind's capacity to be strong. We want the bindi of awareness. The bindi is, the one-pointed awareness. Yeah, bindi has several meanings, but it still implies the same thing in the context. When you see traditional South Asian women, they have a dot on their forehead. That's a bindi. And it's very decorated. It's a red dot, white dot, and all these things. When they're married, in some culture parts of India, they put it here to indicate that they're married, etc. You can do one here, one here. But it also represents a one-pointedness to God's awareness, that your focus is one-pointed. And I know in the last talk we talked about how, Shushruta would say that the lotus, the Padma, as it's blossoming, you put a needle through it, you're still going one petal at a time. You might be doing it fast, but you're just doing this fast, this fast, this fast. You're going through one petal at a time. You're not doing all 10 petals at once. It's still going one at a time. And so that level of increased speed and velocity deviates from the one-pointedness. So if you can focus on like, do this, and you're slowing down, taking care of yourself as part of self-care. And like, the body is made of nutrients, prana, first and foremost. And, it builds based on these things. So you want to affirm what you're putting into your body is appropriate to sustain things in the lifestyle. But if you're not sustaining, if you're getting ill all the time, if you're feeling tired all the time, feeling never rested enough because, the amount of workload, then something has to shift, because something will shift at some point in time, because Kala gets everybody, which is time. And time will show the climax of previous experiences from the past and the present moment, which is disease. When a patient comes in, I'm working on their past, present, and future. They came in with something, but the reason why they have this something is from where these things came from before and accumulated a momentum. And if this momentum doesn't get redirected, so Nidana in Ayurveda is ideological cause, right? It's a cause. It's a factor of like how things accumulate. Nidana Parivarjana is the reversal of the causative factors, which means like if my lifestyle is crazy and running around, Nidana Parivarjana, that's Nidana. Nidana Parivarjana is I need to slow down. I need to make sure I have my 3 meals a day at the same time every day. I need to make sure that my food is of utmost quality to support the integrity of the cells, tissues, organs, different structures, channels, all these things, so that my body can sustain and have a strength of immunity. Because in Ayurveda, we have a system of channels. They're called Shratamsi, or Shodasis, and there's basically 14 of these particular channels. And we know that they exist in Ayurveda because when we treat diseases, when we treat people that have diseases, or when we're trying to prevent diseases and affirming a person's health that comes in with health, we're also addressing on these subtle levels, these things. And so when we have this cause and effect, it's called karana karya, that I do this and you feel good. When you do this, you feel bad. And when I give you this medicine, you start to feel good. And I know it's targeting this Shratamsi, then I know that this is a thing that exists in your body. Western medicine doesn't know what that is. They just put it in a category like it's kind of here somewhere. We know the body's more than just physiological parts and all these things in Ayurveda and Chinese medicine. Like, yeah, we're already past that. You guys have to catch up. We know what we're doing.
Like 5,000
One of
years to catch up.
one of the first one of the main channels is Pranavahashrotas, which is the channel that carries prana, which is circulating throughout the whole body. Vata breaks down into 5 types of vayus, or properties of how Vata manifests in 5 different ways in your body. Prana is the first, and it comes into the crown of the head and goes to the heart. And Hridaya, which I know we talked about, I think 2 or 3 talks ago about the Hridaya. Oh, it was Valentine's. We were talking about Hridaya. Hridaya, just understood there's 10 channels around the heart itself. And prana connects to Hridaya. So when Hridaya, not just as a physical organ, as heart, as the muscle tissue, but the region of what circulates here in a polarity of energy, if this gets stressed, if it gets stressed in the heart, of course, prana is going to be affected. Sometimes people get a cough. I had a little bit of an illness that came through several weeks ago, and it went deep pretty quickly, and it's been excavated mostly. But the remnant is like I have this lingering cough because heart was affected in this region, which is also one of the main seats of immunity. And prana comes from the head, top of the head, goes to the heart. And then the rest of the body is animated from there. Because when prana does not enter, because we understand in Ayurveda, when a person's dying, the last thing we do is we exhale. Prana takes the final breath from the heart, from the lungs area, and goes this way. It goes up and out. We know this as a physics. This is not coincidental. Right? And so we know this is prana vahashrota. When you release the final prana from the body is lifeless. Soul, jiva goes, everything goes, and body is just left as just a rock just sitting there now. So prana is very important. And then we have the other forms of vata that manifest in physics in the body. And so we understand like prana is very vital. And we have to cultivate it, nurture it, nourish it, prolong it. So when we're doing pranayama techniques, special pranayama techniques that are proper for our mind and constitution, we're strengthening the strength of prana itself in the body and in the cells, right? It's like I had a teacher once say, it's like when you look at a dog and you compare it to a turtle, dog has a short lifespan and the turtle has a long lifespan. Dog has short lifespan because it's always panting, which is breathing very fast, which causes oxygenation and the body just it breaks down and degrades a little quicker because it's a faster use of the breath, right? And then a turtle is a slow, deep, full, methodical breath, and they live to like 120 years or 100 years. And the dog average lifespan is 14 years, right? So this is one thing to think like, oh, if a dog is stressed, of course. When we are stressed, of course, lifespan is shortened. And what is the quality of life as it is shortening? It's less because prana is stressed and broken. And then, then you add in other factors, like if a person's had a charitra, which is like the trauma of childhood or trauma of something, any kind of traumas is an exalted offense, an attack on the system. And the mind has to go into this capacity to integrate it and digest it to the best capacity possible. Right? Otherwise, these things will linger and fester in body, fermenting in such a way that ailments can prevail. And so we're looking at like, what's the mind doing? How do we keep mind focused on like, you're not eating while you're driving, and you're not eating while you're on the laptop. You're not eating when you're on the phone. You're not eating standing up, which, it's like a horse when they stand up. You should not be eating.
Standing up, listening to a podcast.
No, yeah, exactly. No good, because this is not going to work with digestion. The body wants to do one thing at a time. If you're going to sit and eat, you focus on sitting and eating. If you think like, well, it's not a big deal if I look on my phone while I'm eating, it is a big deal. The body's like, it's either this or that. Just like, I'm going to eat lunch right now, and then I'm going to go to sleep right now. And body's like, well, one thing at a time. Okay, well, we're going to turn off digestion, even though you have food in there, so you can fall asleep. You're going to wake up with partially or undigested material, which becomes ama, which starts to accumulate in the tissues, channels, arteries, veins, all these things. Then you wonder why over a year or 2 or 3 you feel klamaha, which is fatigue without exertion. or you feel
Mm.
fibromyalgia or chronic fatigue. No, because this is alma that's already manifested, that's undigested in your system that you have to go in and excavate out, you know. And when you're doing things to fortify the body, it requires like attention. When you're cooking, you should be focused on like, welcome to Philly, cutting and preparing and cooking and delivering food and all these things. And eating, digesting, letting the food go in. It's only like 15, 20 minutes to eat. So those 15, 20 minutes you can afford, which is like an investment in your health. If you worry about co-pays and future payments of medications, you're preventing that now by saying, I'm going to focus on my food right now and chew, make sure I'm eating everything properly.
I just want to say that, I have changed my relationship to the experience of eating. And I think that since we've been working together, I definitely do have my like, oh, I'm gonna eat this thing. I'm gonna cook or eat really quickly. I'm a mom, I work, I'm doing 50 things.
Yeah.
There have been, right? And so I will notice it happening. I will offer myself some compassion and say, okay, when's the next time that I can actually have a relationship with this food? What
Mm-hmm.
is the relationship? From the moment of noticing the craving, what's here, right? And then I think we've talked about cravings as an activity of the mind, and so I'm checking in with my brain rather than saying I need this thing. What is here? What's the need
Yeah.
underneath this? The craving for the sweetness. So even from that conscious, mindful relationship of slowing down time and saying, what's here? Okay, I see that I'm craving something sweet. What's the choice that I'm going to make that is relevant or that makes sense for this time of day, for what I'm actually supposed to be eating based off of my constitutions, based off of what we've worked together and has been prescribed. Um, and then the relationship to cooking. Well, my ADHD brain does get bored. And I'm like, when do I love cooking? What do I do that creates a love for cooking, where it doesn't feel like a chore, where I actually am slowing down to enjoy cutting, where I actually am like, what are the textures? What's here where I can have a choice about how, oh, I actually do like to listen to music. And so it's what's the pleasing music that still allows me to be here with the cooking that brings ease into this moment, that so that I can continue to be present with the preparation. And something that I think has been like a new practice of mine is then, oh, how do I eat in silence? Or how do I eat? I can hear the birds because there's a tree outside of my window. I live in the city. We both live in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a tree outside my window, and my bird friends are so excited.
Yeah.
And listening to them and eating and knowing that I have the opportunity to listen to them is magic. Like I can't, I'm smiling right now because like
Yeah.
just the gift of, first of all, the gratitude that I have for the ability to have healthy, fresh food, to be able to have uh, the ability to prepare my food and sit down and to be able to eat it. Like the entire gratitude process changes my experience and my relationship with the food. And then the relationship with the birds and the tree. Um, there is so much magic in my digestion.
Yeah.
And that has a new relationship that I have with my food.
Yeah.
um yeah,
No, and that's good. And these are things. And, the thing is like,
but I never thought about it as changing my digestion. Like you're bringing in something that, right, like I think that there is a commitment to slowness. I think there are
yeah.
there is now, I think that more and more folks are making a commitment to mindful eating. More and more folks are making making conscious choices and sometimes it's still, there may be many reasons, right? Economic reasons. There may be, again, you might have a commitment to changing your relationship to capitalism and speed. And yet, what I'm also hearing is your digestion benefits, and that has um, a lifelong impact on our wellness.
It does. And, because it's a body-mind connection, it's like, what are we feeding the mind? What are we feeding the senses? Because the senses are the way the mind interacts with the world, because the five senses, they're called panchendriya, they are delivering information in the mind, which has various levels of like how it assesses information, is picking up through these five senses the information and interpreting them accordingly, and then going from there. And so it's like, what are we feeding the mind and senses, but what are we also feeding, the body, through nutrition, through touch, through experience and environment, and and mindset. Because of course, if you're eating while you're upset, the food quality you're going to eat, if you had a planned healthy, meal, you could be anxious and then eat it anxiously, or you can, say, well, forget about this lunch that I had prepared. I'm just gonna eat this thing that's gonna correspond to my current mindset, and then later cause indigestion or malabsorption, and then I'm wondering why I'm hungry later because I ate on the go and didn't digest it right, and then I'm like, what's going on? And then you create these levels of like digestive dysfunction that, of course, are going to affect the overall mindset, because the mind's like, I'm really stressed, I'm trying to do all these things, but I'm not getting proper nutrition, so I'm feeling like inundated. And so it's like it's a vicious cycle, and they're not mutually exclusive of each other. They're very much tied into each other, which is why when Western medicine caught up to the next level, thinking there's a mind-body connection, Ayurveda's like, yeah, we knew this 10,000 years ago. Right? This is what's missing, and so the current lifestyle does not support any of these things. And so we have to think about, not everyone has grown up going to the gym, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when you start to go to the gym because your doctor tells you should start going to the gym, you're like, oh my God, and it starts out with a weak muscle. So you have to slowly strengthen it. So people will just be like, how can I get to this achieved state of diet and lifestyle? You have to start somewhere with one step, with the intention of like, this is what I'm going to do over the next 3 months as a 3-month plan, 6-month plan, 12-month plan, because then it will become second nature.
Mm-hmm.
90% of the patients that come in, I'm just already changing their lifestyle, because it has to be
Yes.
supporting and supportive of the conditions that they're coming in with as Nidana Parivarjana. Because if you just come to me and you say, like, I have ulcerative colitis, and I say, okay, here are the herbs that can manage that, without changing your diet and lifestyle, and you're sleeping in the morning and staying up late and eating in between meal times that should be proper allocated meal times, if I am not correcting any of that, I'm just giving you herbs and I'm Western medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And Ayurveda is not. It's a very intricate process. That's why it's very involving, time consuming, it's committing, it's disciplined. The stronger the disease, the more strength Ayurveda has to put muscle into, like dealing with certain things. And, because you're working with physics, you're working with momentum. So the stronger something is, the more you have to put it. And that also is determined by like how long something has been there. And so we have to think about, okay, this is a new adventure, but the lifestyle that I'm living right now is not working. So what do I need to do? I need to make some sacrifices and make some changes and simplify. It's interesting because like I was just multitasking as I was talking to find a quote. And this one popped up perfectly. I'm going to read it. Let's see. Atmana Bishaka Mikshaya Bunjita Samyak Idam Mamo Pashate Idam Na Pashate Ityavam Viditam Hyasyatamana Atma Satmyaha Bhavati Tasmadat Mana Mabishak Mikshya Bunjita Samyagati. One should eat with due consideration to the self, knowing one's own constitution and taste. He should she should take food that is suitable to him or her. So eating with this. And then, you know, this other quote, shloka, is Ajal panahasan tanmana bunjitya jalpato hasato nya manaso va bunjanasya ta eva hi dosha bhavanti ya eva tidruta masatnataha tasma dajal panahasamanatmana bunjita. One should eat with utmost concentration on the food while not talking or laughing. By taking food while talking or laughing or with mind elsewhere, she is afflicted with the same defects as by eating too fast.
Aha.
Focus, concentration, and we can extrapolate further and expand this and go, in my life, what experiences am I eating too fast? Am I not doing one thing at a time? That I'm also not doing that's appropriate for what I need and keeping my self-care as first and foremost. Will life happen? Life is always happening. It will happen with or without you, right? And, Ayu is life. Ayurveda is the science of life. And it will have bumps in the road because the ritus, the seasonal changes, the junctions are moving and things will happen. People die, people are being birthed, traumas happen, this, that, and the other thing. But it's not all the time. If it feels like it's all the time, then it is the person living the life that is ati chestatai and ayasa. And they need to reorganize because if they have a surmounting level of disease condition, this is going to correspond very equally on a graph to the lifestyle. And then there's all the, spiritual considerations and karmic factors that have created this momentum underlying. But we are to take a hold of our life instead of let life run over us, be part of life. So it's working through us, which means as we flow through life, things will gravitate that serve us and things that don't will not. And so we can create the space by simply making ourselves priority as our own special rituals of I will have breakfast at this time, lunch at this time, dinner at this time, adjust per season, adjust per my constitution. Because it's, one of the things to represent Ayurveda properly, when patients come in and are like, what's my dosha? It's not in an Ayurvedic physician's mind to think that way. It's inappropriate thinking, and it doesn't serve any purpose in creating health and well-being in the way people think that it will when I know what my dosha is. Because just because you know what your dosha is doesn't mean your doshas are working the way they should. What will determine what you're eating more so is what is your state of digestion? Because that will determine how the doshas are affecting you. When you're in a state of samavasta, which is established health and wellness and well-being, samavasta, then you're most likely in a place of intelligence where you're knowing when not to overeat, when not to undereat, when to eat at the appropriate times, when to eat appropriately per season, how to digest your food in a proper mindset and in a physical set. And in understanding all these things, you will have a better place of health, which is samavasta. And knowing that will help the long-term gain. And of course, the earlier that this is learned, the better it is as an investment, right? You can start investing in health when you're 50, or start putting an investment in your 401k at 50, but you will get a lot more if you did it at 20. Right? But people come at all different times in their life, and when they come to me when they're 20 or 15 or 30 or 60, I'm meeting you where you're at. I look at your history to see what brought you here, and then I look based on what you've come in with, where is this going to head if I don't intervene properly? How can I redirect the ship in that way that will support your highest goal right now with what you're coming in with? Sometimes it's realizable 100%, sometimes it's going to be 50%, but even 50% means you'll have less medicines from Western medicine, which is still a success. Ayurveda can't, reverse some conditions, because just like any disease process with any disease management, but any clinical medical system, nothing is 100%. No matter what, there's miraculous stories. He had stage 4 this cancer, and he went to see that breath worker in South America that put him on a vegan diet and cured him. And so everyone, okay, maybe, possibly. Will that work for everybody? No, it will not. It cannot, for many reasons. It's just not. If that was the case, I'm sure the Western model would have copy pasted it and try to do it again. But no, so there's all these things to consider. And in the present state, say, what can we do? Well, my life is so busy. Well, then what can you do that's at least basically going to take care of yourself? I read as like, look at the pillars of the day. When do you go to sleep? When do you wake up? When do you exercise? When do you eat your meals? And then if you stabilize that, everything else will fall into place. Because most people are like staying up late, sleeping in late, digestion's off, they have cravings. Of course, this is so predictable in Ira. It's like we're already like, I already know this. Let's keep going. But let's change all this. And people have to be accountable. And then if you want to go extra and go like, oh, I do a YouTube yoga class at home. Okay, that's good. That's what you can do. You don't have time to go to a yoga class. That's fine. And then eventually, like maybe you'll learn enough yoga that you start doing your own practice, right? When people ask me, do I do yoga? I'm like, I do yoga every day. There are various types of yogas that most people don't know about our own things, just asana, but there's Raja Yoga, there's Bhakti Yoga, there's Hatha Yoga, there's Jnana Yoga. And I do pretty much all, or in some variation per day. Definitely asana is part of my lifestyle, and it goes through phases where I might do it every day for 40 days and I might take a break and do it once every 3 days. Like it kind of ebbs and flows, but it can be done, right? Because I know the poses. I don't go to a yoga class. I don't remember the last time I went to a yoga class. I've taught, during COVID, the Zoom classes and things like that, but I do my own practice. I set up the time in the morning. I wake up, brush my teeth, tongue scrape, have bowel movements, go to my yoga room. I light my altar because I have altar to meditate and focus, and then I do chanting, and I do my yoga first, and then it's a connection with the self, and it sets the tone as a springboard for the day. And because of that, it helps me with staying focused in my mind. I have a lot of duties to do throughout the day that I'm definitely jumping a lot of hoops, and I try to like be focused per event as much as possible most times. But like everyone else, it might feel like cooking and answering a call really quick, not a work call while I'm cooking, and kind of catching up. But when I sit down to eat, then more than likely I will be mostly on the phone after the fact. Right? So these are the things, because current times are getting crazy and there's a lot to keep up with. But how do we create separation? Once a week, take a break from the technology, or take a break from whatever the life is, and do something that's going to be connecting you to nature, because that's the best medicine. Everyone knows this. This has been known for like at least 100 years. When people go out on vacation or go away for a weekend in the woods, they are reset, digestion is calmer, they're sleeping better, their circadian rhythm realigns, and all these things. When people do these special yoga retreats, it's great. The potential when you're in that environment that's structured and people start to thrive. But the true test is taking that template and applying it to your life.
And that is, I think, coming back to Prana dying in the microwave, right? That the quick fix, that this is not a quick fix, is not a lifestyle or a living practice, an embodied practice of wellness, right? And yet sometimes the quick fixes are our survival strategies, right? They are in response to need. They are in response to gaps in resources, right? And so I think that there's something we need communally, right? Because the quick fixes are also about the individual. And so when I think about even with cooking, you know, I think that there is something so important about for me about being able to cook for other people. Like I feel that my cooking, when I relate to cooking with love, it is because I'm cooking from love for love. But also when I just think about, you know, how we are calling ourselves into new relationships with time, we're also calling ourselves new relationships with sharing. And that I think is deeply important. That I think is, um, and you know, the the individual's responsibility, right? That it is on the individual to figure it out. This is a new construction, right? This is a new construction of capitalist Western culture. And so when we are reaching back, like this is like I think of Sankofa and like the wisdom of Sankofa to look back, to go back and get it. This is a you know, Sankofa is an Ndinkra Ghanaian uh proverb or symbol. It's a symbol, but also has meaning, purpose. It means to go back and get it, to look back to the past for the wisdom
Mm-hmm.
um, and that we need now. And this is, I think, what is also required for us to change our relationship to life force, for us to change our relationship, period, when we're talking about the wellness that we have in right relationship with nature. I ran this morning. I took my child to school and I ran, and my running and being with, and I run with the birds too, just my ability to look at the trees running up and down the street is a reset for me. And it brings me back into myself. And then I come back into the house and I have fresh energy to prepare for the day. It is entirely different than when I wake up and I have not been in relationship. I'm with my plants all the time. But I think
Mm-hmm.
the relationships that we have communally as well are a part of our wellness. They're a part of our ability to build a village, a network that allows us to rebel against the speed, the requirements for speed, that allows us to do that. I'm wondering what Ayurveda says about community and the communal practices, the communal support that allows us to come back in right relationship with our prana or with prana. I don't want to claim it.
Yeah, so in Ayurveda we have what's called the Chatushpads, which are the four pillars to sustaining health. Ayurveda has like a lot of groupings of a lot of things. It will have like 50 different things of four things are important. These are the four things. And so you have the Bishak, you have the Upastita, you have the Rogi, and you have the Aushadha. And so the Bishak is the doctor, you know, you have the Upastita, which is the support system, could be nurse or assistant or family member. You have the Rogi, which is the person that has the disease, the patient, and Aushadha, which is the medicine, right? So if we think about this in terms of Ayurvedic concepts of the Chatushpads, and so we say, you know, and it's important to have all four because the medicine's important. What is the medicine, right? And so if we apply this to the philosophy of life, it's like, what is the medicine that we need? Community is a medicine, right? I mean, it's not coincidental that as a patient is seeking an Ayurvedic doctor for like health management issues, the doctor has to give the medicine, but also make sure that you can do this sustainably with some one that loves and cares for you around you. Someone to make sure, like, hey, how are you doing? Did you take medicine? Want me to take you to a doctor's appointment? Da, 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 da. Like, these are all the little things that, not coincidentally there. So in society as a medicine, we have to know what is the medicine, which could be like, what are we doing to entertain ourselves? What are we doing to involve with our life and lifestyle? And then who's around us? We need people. We have to have supportive community. That's why I've met people over years. They're like, well, I live by myself. and I don't really cook very much because it's just for myself. And I'm like, no, you should cook for yourself as if it's a feast because you are still in this body as as you know, it's a gift to have a body, right? And it
Hmm.
is your responsibility to take care of it in a responsible way. And why not treat yourself in the best way? Because as you do this, you're going to put this energy out there. And this will be something that will polarize and be magnetic. And people will be like, oh, you look great. And I'm like, yeah, I just made, and people feel this empowered when they're like, oh, I live alone, I don't really want to eat, it's a hassle, blah blah blah. It's like, no, the divine lives in this body, and I'm
Hmm.
still offering to the divine some fruits of the produce of what's external in my life. So I'm not going to be cheap with it. You know, I will take myself to a five-star restaurant anywhere in the world, and I have, or I will make a five-star meal at home, which I've done many times. And whether it's by myself or the enthusiasm and inspiration of when people are coming, that I cook for many people. But I just take what I normally would do for myself and just multiply that for how many people are coming. And that makes me excited. And then the energy of like, oh, I'm wondering what they're going to think about the food today. And, this combination, the colors, the presentation, like all these things, like that's part of the ritual. It's not a
Hmm.
chore like, oh my God, they're coming over for dinner. I have to freaking make something to eat. Can we just order some crappy food and get boxed frozen food? And no, my friends always get fresh food. And sometimes if not just fresh, they get it from scratch. you know. And so it's like I'm giving them medicine through the food. I'm giving them medicine through the context of, what I've prepared and the intentions and the mindset behind what I'm offering. Of
Hmm.
course, we need this. And, it's like we can't because we're not on this planet alone. So we have to support each other and like, what is community? And, I've had this conversation before, and actually something very curiously magical happened where I was visiting my mom in New York for the weekend, and um, the son of a neighbor, I never met him, surprisingly, but I knew his mother, and she died not that long ago. So he was coming across the street, we're talking, and I was like, yeah, I've never met you. This is very funny, but we've lived across the street from each other for decades. And I said, the neighborhood's not the way it used to be, where we knew each other and we would just go to each other's houses and kind of have food or
Hmm.
like tea or like a glass of wine and kind of like knew each other. It's not like that today for so many disjointed reasons, unfortunately. And I felt, like whether it's there or here, I don't have this same communal connection, which is nice. So when I do have a neighbor that's like, hey, how are your roses doing today? I'm like, oh my God, this is great. She's talking to me. And I
Mm.
appreciate that. Um, so as I was having this conversation with him, I think the neighbor next door that has been living there for like 12 years or 15 years or something, I think might have heard like me saying like, we used to all know each other and be like, hey, how are you
Yeah.
doing? All these things.
Hmm.
Because suddenly after this person left, maybe like 10 minutes later, the guy next door comes up to his fence and he's like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, this is the most he's ever had a conversation with me. I don't even live here, but he's seen me enough to know. And I'm like, wow, this is very interesting. And then like later that day when I was leaving with my dog, his wife, which I've never met, came up to me. She's like, oh my God, you have a dog. This is like for 20 minutes. He's like having this conversation. She's like, oh, it's da, da, da. And I'm just like, this is nice. you
Hmm.
know? And so it's just like that's a good feeling when we don't feel alone. And I might have mentioned in one of the talks before, I'm like, one of the treatments for mental health illness historically has been not to displace someone and make them feel like it's your problem, we want nothing to do with you. It's a societal issue.
That's right.
And so in some cultures still in Africa and like in South America, and some small towns in Italy, if you're mentally struggling with something, the community comes closer.
Hmm.
Just like, and I've had this conversation with friends that are very good, thoughtful friends, but they like the idea, but they don't say anything further. They have this mentality, and I love my friends, where I'm like, if there's a conflict amongst the community members, the community would come together and help everyone to figure it out.
Yeah.
And when I've had this conversation with some friends that have had some conflicts and like everyone's like, oh, I don't want to get involved. It's like, you are involved by the virtue that now these two people that are accordant or discordant, and the structure has changed within the structure of that community. Then now it's like, well, now you will hang out with them and you will hang out with them separately and then come to this community space, but then they won't hang out. No, you've changed the community, you've partaken in that, and you are responsible.
This, when you just said that, what came to me was transformative health. That and I'll just leave it there. I want to say that, you know, right now we live in a time where there's an opportunity for us to create communal care to repair the injustices that are born in racialized capitalism and colonialism, and the strategies that you know, so many brilliant people have been thinking about, and this is a Sankofic strategy, to your point, like for transformative justice, for not excluding and removing when bodies and people, when harm has been done in the community, all of the community is hurting. This is very much applicable to our health and our wellness, our mental health and mental wellness. So we're gonna come back to transformative health because there is something magical here. I want to thank you, Dr. Antonio
Yeah.
Aragona. Oh my goodness. Um, such a wealth of wisdom. And I love flowing with you. And I am deeply, deeply grateful for you in this world. Please find Dr. Antonio Aragona at Still Point Ayurveda. We will be back next month. And I hope that you will follow Dr. Antonio, find him at Still Point Ayurveda. Is there anything else you'd like to say, Dr. A, before we close out?
Well, it's like, come one, come all. I'm always taking new patients, and you could go on this journey of health and well-being from many different angles with me. And I'm always in service to the community because this is my dharma, this is my path, this is my passion. I love living Ayurvedically as much as possible.
I know you do. And I just want folks to know, if you've ever seen anyone dance when they think about going to see their doctor, I just want you to know, like, this is how I am. Like,
Yeah.
that's how I come in. I don't always walk in like that, but I walk out like that. So, all right.
Yeah.
I
Well,
will
thank
see you
you.
soon. Thank you.
I will
Thank you.
see
Be
you
well.
soon. Always a
All
pleasure.
right.
Yes.
You too. All right.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. So I'm going to end the video. Stop. Okay. Stop recording. Thank you.